head of diversity and inclusion at Fidelity Investments. She's a 23-year veteran at Fidelity, and she has served in a succession of leadership roles. But she began there as an actuary. So, first of all, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, first of all, and I know that to you, this will be like, what do you mean people don't know? Some people don't know. What is an actuary? Let's just start there and get it out of the way.
Sure. So an actuary is a business professional that uses math and statistics to predict outcomes, and to, generally where people run into actuaries is mostly in the life insurance world. But I actually spent a lot of my time working in the retirement business on pension plans, which I know a lot of people may not have anymore, but that was how I started out. So I started in consulting to large clients who had pension plans for their employees.
And I know, when I hear actuary, I automatically, the English major that I was, think math, other side of the brain, not the side that in my case really flourished as much as the other. So I know that you were like a super math girl from a young age.
Yeah.
Can you sort of talk about how you even became an actuary? Because it's not what typically when people say to a child, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Actuary, most don't know what it is, right? So how did that career path develop for you?
It's a great question, and a story I really like to tell because it really was all about one teacher. So, interestingly enough, my father was an accountant. And so he knew about the actuarial field, but that wasn't where he was encouraging me to go. But I had a math teacher at about the age that I was, 15 or 16. I had always been really good at math. And I loved her. She taught math in a way that made it sort of, the numbers sort of jumped off the page to me. And she asked me, what are you planning to do, for the future? And I said, well, I know that I want to do something with a lot of math, but I don't want to teach math. So I said, I think I'm going to do electrical and computer engineering. And she thought, oh, okay. She's like, do you love physics? I said, well, I like it. I do it, but, I don't love it. She said, well, I think I have something for you. And we all can probably relate to the manila folder, right? With like pages in there that described what an actuary was. And so for me, when I read it and it said, math and statistics in business, like that part just resonated to me, and I thought, oh, I wasn't completely rid of physics yet, but I wouldn't have to do that for the rest of my life. So I made the decision based on what she described to me, and also the fact that this was someone who I really valued their opinion, who knew me very well, who was steering me in a direction. And I thought, why not?
Yeah. It's interesting. I think we all have had, if we're really lucky, that one or two teachers who really saw a spark in us and really, helped to fan that flame and
Yeah.
create all sorts of possibilities that might not have existed for us. But I think in your case, because we're talking about math and then you were talking about chemical engineering, physics, science, and she was a female teacher.
Yes.
We should broaden this picture and say that you were born and raised in Trinidad, West Indies, and this was an all girls educational environment, right? So can you talk a little bit about your background? Because I think it's really interesting how your education developed, particularly given gender issues and what can happen to girls who are total math and science heads.
Yeah, no, it's that's a great point that you're making. And yes, I did grow up in the Caribbean. I'm really proud of that heritage. But there are a lot of things that I'm going to share now that I didn't really realize while it was all happening, right? And so that conversation really was the beginning of, if you think about the tree of life, it was the beginning that led to one of the branches that I can point to, because that decision about becoming an actuary actually meant for me, which even in the moment I probably didn't realize, that I would probably have to leave the school that I was at that I loved. And why is that? Because, not many girls wanted to follow that pursuit of studies. It was mostly a curated program for the boys. And so once I identified that I wanted to do it, I had lots of conversations actually with my then principal, even though it had never been done at our school. And she was sort of like, nope, we don't, if you really want to do it, we could find some teachers and bring them in. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a real experiment, very risky, where all the other girls were going to boys' schools. And the other piece of this is that I actually am Episcopalian, or in the Caribbean, Anglican. And most of the girls that were studying this at that time were going to Catholic schools. And so I actually had to go broker a deal with the Catholic girls' schools, the convent, to transition to their school, to wear their uniform, but to take classes in their sister boy college that was across the street. And I actually reflect back on that. And the fact that I was able to maneuver that at 16, still I kind of go, interesting. But I did. I just literally, I asked a friend, I got an appointment, I pled my case, and a lot of people worked together to make that happen. But I spent the last 2 years of my high school life in an all-boy college. I was one of 8 girls in a school of 1,000 boys. And that prepared me for pretty much everything else.
And it's worth just clarifying that those 8 girls in that school of 1,000 boys were all, like you, particularly interested in math studies that they didn't even offer at the girls'
Correct.
school. So these are advanced accelerated math courses that would prepare you for careers,
Yes.
that would leverage that. I heard you tell a story once that was really compelling to me. It spoke a lot about your character and your fortitude as a very young woman, where it seems that those 8 girls really performed well.
Yes.
And at one point were outperforming the boys, and your scores and your grades were kept tabulated and sort of made public to the student body. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So unfortunately, there are rituals in some of these schools around, sort of like almost weekly or monthly prize giving, right? Where they acknowledge the ranking of the classes. And at this college, the teachers, many of them were priests. And so they would, delegate the sort of capturing of the grade to some student in the class. And so there'd been a number of these prize giving ceremonies where the girls were in the top 3. And I think the boys in our class were getting a lot of flack from the rest of the school. And then all of a sudden, sort of week after week, the girls were no longer in the top 3. And I thought, that's perhaps it was the stats, but that's not statistically sound. And I started doing some exploring, and I realized that there's no way that was right, that something must be happening. And I knew one of my classmates had the responsibility of entering the grades. He was someone I knew well. Our families were friends. But I really just didn't think it was right. And so when I had first gotten to that school, there was another teacher there that my father knew well, who had said, if Wendy ever needs anything, you should tell her to come to me. And so I went to him and said, I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but it's not fair. And I wonder, what should we do? And before I knew it, there it was. The gig was up, and everyone knew. And it was terrifying because, you're coming into this school every day and the odds are not on your side. And I wondered whether there would be any backlash. And, we did have a stern conversation one day by the lockers about the fact that I had put him in a really terrible situation. And I said, well, yeah, but it just wasn't the right thing. And I was fortunate. I had a few other friends at the school that were sort of looking out for me. So I never really felt like I was at risk, but it did take a lot to speak out and know that I was already different, right? And stood out in the school. And now I felt like, wow, you're like literally putting a mark on your back.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, you said at the outset that, you were going to talk about a lot of things that you only recognize in hindsight, right? So
Yeah.
of course, at that time, 16, 17 years old, you don't really have a sense of what it means to be a whistleblower. You don't really have a sense of these larger gender issues even, right? I think even in that skewed an environment, you just think, oh, it's about loyalties to the school, or it's just boy-girl stuff, but you're not really thinking in that broader context. And yet I would imagine as you went on into your field, and went through college and all the rest of it, that those experiences must have served you incredibly well. And I bring that up because I think now about young people launching in this environment, right? And there have been so many young people just coming out of college, grad school, derailed instantly, lost jobs in their first big job, or trying to get jobs at a time when, it's just everything is entrenched and chaotic and it's difficult. And what I've been saying to young people is, my hope for you is that this is as bad as it gets, right? Because I think on some level, when you encounter those really difficult things when you're very young, it can only get better in a way, which you don't realize at the time, and it never feels good to go through rough times. But if it really prepares you for the difficult times, then lucky you in a way. So did you come to feel that in your career?
I did. I mean, I think at the time, you're right. It was happening. I thought, wow, I haven't been in a school with boys since I was like 11. 16 is like, awkward. And I had an older brother, so it wasn't like that part was foreign. It just was sort of, you're, as a girl, you're very, you're self-conscious, right? At that point. And you really don't want to be, you want to be accepted, right? Everybody wants to be accepted. You're not trying to look for reasons or more reasons to be set apart. And I think what was interesting about that experience was how much maybe people didn't even realize, and even I might not have realized, that I'd taken myself out of a situation where I was, very normal and in the majority. And now I'm, in hindsight, again, first time that I was in a minority, but it was based on gender. And then there have been times since that, right? I've spent a lot of my time, both when I was in college, I ended up in a class as the only female in my second year of algebra. I've had people ask me, like, how did you get to be really good at math? Which became a complex question because I wasn't sure if they meant because I was from the Caribbean, because I was female, or, certainly in that order. Last, like, is it because I'm Black? Like, I didn't really know. And I'd always been good at math. And I went to an all-girls school, so it stood to reason that a girl would be good. So I didn't really understand these questions when they first came up, but I've faced those types of questions like over and over. And I think what's been good about my past experience is being able to say, okay, I get it. They don't understand my specific journey, so I have to tell a little bit more of my story. And then there are times where I just decide, you know what, this isn't really about me. I'm showing up differently than maybe how people would expect me to show up. And while that has its challenges, I'm just going to focus on what I'm actually here to do. And that's not to trivialize the environment that I found myself in. I've spent 30 years now in North America. It's a totally different construct. And I understand that when people see me, they automatically think, in particular in many of the rooms I'm in, oh, somebody, decided that that person needed to be here for a reason. They don't automatically assume that it's because of ability.
Yeah. Yeah. You have made the transition to head of diversity and inclusion at Fidelity in the midst of the pandemic. And I think it's an interesting story about how you came to this position, not the least of which is the timing, sort of right in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, but also because of your track, right? So you were not sort of on the diversity track at all. So can you talk about that transition? I think it's clear that a lot of your life experiences have set you up to succeed here and to bring a great deal to it, but it wasn't sort of where you were planning to be at this juncture.
No, it wasn't. And on a couple different levels, right? I think I had, taken a really great job last year around Labor Day. I was really excited about that. It was a change from what I had been doing, and I was indulging myself both from a professional standpoint, but also in terms of having an impact in a nonprofit, environment. And was really excited about that, right? So I served as the chief administrative officer of our independent public charity for almost a year. And while I had been always very involved with our diversity and inclusion efforts, I worked with our very first head of D&I to establish our employee resource groups. I had, set up chapters of those in the various regions I was in. So I was supporting from the sidelines, doing a lot of work off the side of my desk. It wasn't really the thing that I wanted to step out into, the open on. And I've been very careful and deliberate about the choices I've made around my career, and thought about what skill sets I'm going to gain, and the impact that I'm going to have on the organization. And so, this outreach came about because my most recent predecessor actually found a fantastic role within the firm to be part of our sales organization. And that happened it was announced at least 2 weeks before the George Floyd murder. And so I did get a call. It was sort of like, we really would like you to think about this. And I was sort of like, I don't know if it's the right thing for Wendy. And do I really want to lean into this job? It's in the middle of the pandemic. Who knows what's going to happen? And then, as luck would have it, Memorial Day weekend happens. And for many of us, it started with Amy Cooper. And so that was happening over that weekend. And I was sort of like, it's so disappointing that this is still occurring. And then you had the George Floyd murder. And I must say, if I know in hindsight, like, again, if that phone call had not come before the events of the weekend, I probably would have spent way more time and energy thinking about the motivation for the call. It means a lot to me to know that I was thought of as a candidate before all of the events that brought racial equity front and center. Because that, at least for me, it's only for me. I know there may be other people who may be thinking, oh, we know why Wendy got the job. But for me, it meant it was about my ability. It was about things that I had done already through that point. And no question, a lot of us can say like the world went on pause for a minute there, but up through that point, people already thought that I was, the right person for the job. And that's what kind of compelled me to really go through the process and think about it differently.
Yeah.
And really, but I would say the moment is very important. But what was more important was also our reaction to it, and setting up the conditions that were right for a Wendy to come into this role and really feel like I could make a difference.
Yeah, you mentioned Amy Cooper, and I know that that story, hit you particularly acutely because although you did not know her, you went to the same college that she did
Yes.
in Canada. And just to remind people, Amy Cooper was the white woman in Central Park in New York City who called the police on a Black man because he asked her to leash her dog, which was the rule in that part of the park. And it took on a life of its own. And
Yes.
she was also in financial services. So there were a few intersections there.
There were. Yeah, my friends could not help but remind me of that, but yes.
Yes, that the alma mater was not coming through for you in that moment.
No.
But I'm curious, Wendy, because you had only been in your prior job for about a year, just under a year. That job was, as you mentioned, a shift for you, right? It was a real pivot within the organization. And you were going to be doing something that you were called to, from sort of a passion point standpoint, heading up the charitable branch of Fidelity. And this then pulls you out into an entirely different sphere when, I would imagine to some degree you were sort of just hitting your rhythm in that role. So I am curious about your process there, because I think that a lot of people are having to go through significant career transitions now, whatever those look like. Some are similar to yours where, new needs within the organization necessitate them being pulled in a different direction. Other people are being displaced. Others are self-propelling out of jobs into new situations. But to do all of this with everything else that's already happened, given COVID, given remote living. I joked with you before we got on that, you look like you're in the office, but of course your office is at home. And you said, you put on the full swag every day because that's part of what helps you show up the way you need to for work. But how did you move through this transition, and how was it significantly different from those that you've been through before? Because you've been through a lot of them.
Yeah, I have been. And I will tell you, each one is a little bit different. So just one clarification. So I supported the head of the charity, Pam Norley, but I was the chief administrative officer. So responsible for quite a few different things. But that was a pivot from being a managing director for many years, serving clients. And that decision was really hard because that was another job that I really loved. And I thought, you know what, the move to the charitable brought together, like I said, two really clear interest points for me. It was about, a desire to sort of not be doing some things off the side of my desk and some things in my day job, but to bring it all together. And I had a great opportunity to learn from another female leader. And so honestly, if you had asked me, I would have said, there's no way I'm leaving this job in, less than a year. I've never done a job for less than maybe 2.5. But the taking the head of D&I at this particular point in time felt different. And in full transparency, I talked to a number of people in my network, right? So I have a number of friends that already do this work. And I said, why would I take this job right now? Why would I do that? And they said, well, Wendy, you got to think about one, never before has there been this level of enthusiasm, focus, and support for the work. So if you're going to do the job, this is the time to do it. And you do a job like this, Wendy, these are people knowing me and the jobs I've had at Fidelity, you do that to be able to, really help an organization that you've spent so much time at, get to the right place. And that I really reflected on that, right? Because I joke a lot that, I've been at Fidelity for 23 of my birth. So it's sort of, it is a place I know. It is a place where I have had great experiences, and I've learned a lot about myself. I've had the opportunity to take on roles and challenge myself in different ways. And I want to make that possible for a lot of other people.
But it is a time, you mentioned, if there's a time to be in this work, it's now. But there is an enormous amount of scrutiny around diversity and inclusion work now. And it has taken on a level of, importance that, while it's certainly welcome by those of us, who care so deeply about this work, it's just such a chaotic time. And organizations are under so many stressors that in many ways, it's a really complicated time to be doing this work. So I know you're just a few months into it, but how have you gone about sort of managing the needs of, diversity, inclusion, and belonging at Fidelity at a time when everything is so fraught for every organization? How have you set about setting priorities?
Yeah, it's definitely been very challenging. I really thought about, my first 90 days in the job and how did I want to be showing up? And what did I need to accomplish? And so a big part of that for me, again, this might be the analytical, actuarial side, it might be the consultant in me, but I felt like I needed to really understand where we are. And so I spent a lot of the main priority was to spend time with my business unit partners to understand not just the sentiment, but what work is already being done, right? And where is everyone, and what is sort of the sentiment around how quickly we can keep moving forward, right? And what were people already doing? So that was important. We cover a number of regions across the country as well as globally. And so I was able to spend time and listen in on some associate experience sessions that we had across all of our regions, including India and Ireland, and really hear from managers what they were struggling with. And these weren't just about diversity and inclusion. This was like, what is top of mind for you right now? And then similarly at Fidelity, we have 10 affinity groups. And so I was able to meet with each of them and really listen to what was on the top of their membership mind, and what they were looking for and needing. And it was, there's a few things that I observed. So everyone was really feeling vulnerable and displaced in some way. The factors or the triggers are different, but this pandemic has thrust all of us into new roles, meaning some of us are serving as teachers at home, some are caregivers, and so everybody is uncomfortable. And I really think there's some science to why then D&I was able to kind of find itself and firmly plant itself, root itself in the center of all of this, because everyone was vulnerable.
Yeah.
So we saw each other in a different way than we might otherwise. And quite frankly, we didn't have the busyness of life around us. And so I think what we're seeing now is it's a real difference maker, right? There's no differentiation between home and work. You're talking to me in my home, right? That's why the getting dressed is important. But there's also like, we now see people, right? If you think about diversity and inclusion, the inclusion part, which is about making people who feel invisible, visible, and people who feel they don't have a voice, hearing them differently. I just feel like the Zoom rooms that we're in, has kind of made that more possible, right? Like you see people, you see their spouses, you see their children, you see their dogs, whether they want you to or not, right? You can't hide those people. And so I just feel like we're seeing each other really differently.
Yeah. And I think too, people show up differently, I mean, I think when you are in your home environment, even if you have a designated home office and that's really all you use it for, you're home. And I think that we just fundamentally show up differently at home in a way that does make it possible for people to see us in a more holistic way. So, but I do think too, I would imagine, and I'm interested to know, that's one thing, but then the belonging piece, does that become more difficult when you are seeing people in their own environments and maybe they have things, on the walls behind them or around them that give people a window a little bit more into who they are and how unique they are, has that been an issue at all?
I think, yes, and right. I mean, that's one of my favorite answers to things is that yes. So we definitely are seeing more of everyone, and you do get glimpses, right? And so for some people, it's a wonderful conversation piece. So and one, it also requires me to be looking at you. So some people are in Zoom, but they're not really looking at what's happening, and so they miss things. And I always joke, like I try to recreate what I would be doing if I were in person. And so if we're in a big group, I'm looking in gallery view, right? And I'm looking to see body language and how people are reacting to different things, because I need those cues. That's just how I'm wired. But, if it's just you and I, like I might ask about that painting behind you, and that might create a conversation for us that would draw a connection point that we didn't know we already had. And so I think for the people that are present in the Zoom, there's opportunities, right, to form connections, and not just look at the differences. I think the other thing to be mindful of, not everybody, some people just love virtual backgrounds, but some people, virtual backgrounds are not a choice. It's just a different way of masking what's going on, right? Because I don't want you to see my bedroom or my whatever's happening in the background. I love that people have that choice, right? I think the other thing that, we've been encouraging everyone to do, I have mine, is that I'm able to like add my pronouns. And so we're even having, people are able to, share their identity in a way that's not as risky, very easy, doesn't have to be a whole conversation. So I just think we're learning how to interact with each other differently. And that's giving it more texture, right? However, that it's all kind of masking other things that might be going on for each of us. And so there is that opportunity for that false sense of security. We also know that, like, we've hired a ton of people who've never actually been at one of our offices. They've never interacted in person with their teams. And, we're trying to understand or think about, how does that change, what it means to be part of Fidelity? And there are people here who are having a very different experience of the firm than what we all have.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's a really complicated knot. Um, I know that you're a huge proponent of ERGs, and you were, as I think you mentioned earlier, significant to the founding of a few of the ERGs at Fidelity.
Yeah.
And I know that you have, again, these resource groups in addition, and you have some that I believe are just starting now, even
Yeah.
in the midst of COVID. So, how does the role of ERGs change during times like these? And at Fidelity, how have your ERGs sort of stepped up to leverage this time more? And how is it that new groups are even arising now, which I find really interesting in a remote environment?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think so. It's a great question. And yes, I'm a huge fan of employee resource groups, which we call ERGs, and they're affinity groups. So
Right.
we actually have two of them. So two sets. We have 6 employee resource groups, and then we have now 4 special interest groups. And so our employee resource groups center around our Asian employee population, our African American or Black and Latinx community. That group is called Aspire. Our veterans group called Five Fidelity Veterans. We also have a few other groups, our Women's Leadership Group, our Fidelity Pride organization, and our Enable for our differently abled employees. And then our special interest groups are sort of separate, right? It's our Young Professionals Network, our Raise ERG for those that are caregivers, either of young children or other family members, our WITSIG, which is Women in Technology Special Interest Group. And then the newest is a sustainability focus group called Impact. And these are all employee led. There's a process where you have to sort of apply and make a case for why you think this group is needed and has value, and the support that that you have, as well as the types of efforts that you would focus on. But I think that it's really important to create communities and safe spaces for a lot of the conversations that are happening now weren't happening before. They were happening in these small ERGs, right? Not in a broad scale, but people need community. And community isn't just for the target demographic that we're talking about. Many of these groups have allies that are members, or people that just, I might be I might not be a military vet, but I might have somebody who's a military veteran that I love, right? And I want to better understand them, or understand what the challenges might be or opportunities for them in the workplace. Similarly, that's where we're finding a lot of the benefits for some of our employees in joining some of the ERGs is around better understanding their children who might be, identifying as transgender. How do I have that conversation? How do I be supportive to them? And so we just see this community building. I think of the ERGs and the special interest groups as like the perfect role models for inclusion, right? They're already inclusive. They invite everybody to join, and they take everybody as they are. They also have evolved for us over the last decade into more of a business resource group. So many of our business teams, when they're looking for diverse perspectives, before they go externally to get a focus group, they can go to our ERGs and say, we're trying out this product and service. We want to better understand. And it's been really, it's resulted in better products for us. Our Enable ERG has been really helpful in terms of the accessibility of our website and our apps, as well as how we interact internally as well for some of our, those that might be losing their vision or hearing impaired. And our Pride group has really helped us in our branch network to understand how to engage LGBTQ customers in a way that they would want to be engaged. So it's been really, it's been a great experience. And I think I might have shared with you just a couple of weeks ago, we were celebrating the 10-year anniversary of our Aspire ERG. And they really have led us, to be honest, through a lot of the recent events around racial equity. And what we found was there were some of our employees internationally who wanted to be a part of Aspire. And so we just launched Aspire International, which includes a chapter in Ireland and a chapter in India. And I just need to say it. 10 years ago, when we were thinking about building community for the then maybe 50 or so of us that we knew about, in the New England area, we weren't ever thinking that there would be an international component to this. So I think they're so powerful, perhaps even more powerful than we know.
Yeah.
In the formation was more to create that space for those that we knew of, but it's blossomed into so much more.
And it's grown. I mean,
Oh yes,
the Aspire group at Fidelity has grown exponentially. I think you have what, upwards of 5,000 members now.
yeah, oh,
And my understanding is when you had this celebration, you had alums return
yes,
even. So, I think we don't often think of employee resource groups and these, sort of DIBS oriented groups, diversity, inclusion, belonging groups at
yes,
organizations, and how they supersede even the organization to really have meaning over the course of an entire lifetime. Not just in connecting you because you shared a common workplace, but because you shared this very unique experience within that workplace.
yeah.
And that support is really invaluable over the course of a lifetime. I think that really speaks incredibly well of the connections that people have made at Fidelity through these organizations.
Yes, and I think, I mean, yes, and so it was. I mean, it was really heartwarming for us to be able to invite back some of the alumni, and also tell the story, right? And we did it in in a very linear way, but we talked about life pre-Aspire, right? And how we all sort of like, life pre-Aspire, it's very individualistic, right? You're in your work environment, you show up at your job, maybe you see one or two people that look like you, and you're like, you're one more person. And then the real need to create that community. Certainly many of us were gathering in small groups, but the ability to bring, like, 47 people were present at the launch event. And some of those were invited guests, just so we're clear. And now to have 5,000 people, to have people from all over observing and asking questions or reconnecting, or, seeing someone who was instrumental to them in their career. It's I don't know, it's just powerful, right? And to be able to speak to some of these examples that and share them with other people
Yeah.
of what was possible at our firm. And that's a lot of what this is about.
Yeah. Well, I think, and Wendy, I mean, honestly, you're a powerful example also, because more than half of your career at Fidelity was pre-Aspire, where
Yes.
you were one of those few, which you had the experience of being, from the time you were a girl and a math head in Trinidad.
Yep.
Um, but you knew enough to know how important it was to get those groups formed at Fidelity. You were involved in that effort. And now, at this juncture, to be heading up the entire, diversity and inclusion effort at the company is, there is an arc to it that, while it may not have seemed to make sense at the time, does really make sense in large part now when you think about it. And I think, at this moment, as we sort of approach the end of an extraordinary year for
Yeah.
everyone, one in which, I think the most compelling thing is that we have had so little control. We have felt so little control all
Yeah.
of our lives. I don't care who you are, I don't care where you are, I don't care what you do. Just sort of ground to this abrupt halt.
Yeah.
And we've been ever since trying to figure the way forward with these constraints that we can't largely control. So as we move to the end of the year, and you sort of reflect on, the year and the whole arc of your career and what you want to bring to this space going forward, what are you thinking about in terms of 2021, and how things will look? You're not just dealing with your colleagues at Fidelity, but your work extends to your clients as
Yeah.
well, and to the charitable organizations that I
Yeah.
know you created relationships with in your last role. So, what are you thinking as you come into this next year about how to make it everything it can be, in spite of the fact that we have these ongoing question marks looming everywhere?
Yes. I mean, I think a big part of it is, I think we all have to get really comfortable with ambiguity. And we have to just, we're not going to know. I mean, I couldn't even begin to tell you what 2021 is going to look like. And so I think that a lot of what I've been doing this year in particular is just, it's every day. It's like, what difference can I make today? That I can control to some extent, right? I know I have a finite set of hours in the day. There's a certain number of tasks I can do. Um, whose life can I improve? How can I show up? What might I be putting in position for tomorrow? And then I kind of have to just be willing to trust that the universe will come together. I mean, I've seen some amazing things happen this year, right? I mean, we stood organizations up from home almost overnight, things that we thought we wouldn't be able to do. And that's one of the things that I know to be true, is that we have potential beyond what our eyes and our ears and, that we think we have. To your point, I look back in the rearview mirror, and I, I at 16, I could only probably think out as far as 25, and I did all those things and then some. And that's only because I was open to the possibility and to listening to and following advice and counsel of those who wanted to point me in a direction, and being willing to take the risk, right?
Yeah.
And also, I would say, not being daunted by the fact that you might be the only. Somebody has to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you left out, so you said, opportunity, you said being open, but you're optimistic, right?
Yeah.
Optimistic that even when you can't quite figure out in your mathematical brain how the equation is going to come together,
Yeah.
Being optimistic as you lean into that ambiguity you mentioned,
Yes.
that it will work out. It will work out, and maybe in ways that make more sense than you could ever figure out in an equation, which
Yes.
definitely happened for you and for Fidelity. So
Yeah, no, thank you. It might not work out the way you thought it would gonna
right.
work out, but it generally works out, right? And
Yeah.
that's not to suggest that it's going to be easy. All of this is, I say internally, like, it's hard work, so it's hard work.
Yeah.
And so we just have to gear up every day. You got to take care of yourself. You have to give yourself grace, but you have to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say good is not synonymous with ease,
No.
and bad is not synonymous with hard. Things you can skate through some really bad terrain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And things can be incredibly good and incredibly difficult at the same time. And in fact, I think often are, maybe more than we just acknowledge, because we have a different attitude about it. But Wendy, I know that in addition to everything that you're dealing with, professionally, your mother is in Trinidad and you haven't been able to see her. I just want you to know, as we head into the holidays, I wish you and I wish your whole family, including your family back in Trinidad, well. I do hope you get to see each other soon. And thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's been fantastic having conversation with you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Have a
You
great
too.
day, everybody. Stay safe and stay well.